the second part of the lecture is to look at the techniques in dietary assessment. So the learning outcomes that we would like to emphasize is, the first one is to explain common techniques in measuring diet. So you should be able to explain the methods. And the second one is to explore modes of dietary interview. And finally, to discuss consideration in dietary assessments for special groups. So you have seen this figure just now. So this is showing all the techniques in measuring diet at population level, household level, and also individual level. So let's go to the first level, which is the population level. So we only have one type of techniques in dietary assessment at the population level, which we call as food balance sheet. So food balance sheet can be seen or downloaded from FAO Stat website, Food and Agriculture Organization website. So they have a food balance sheet for countries and also for worldwide. And also, I think, for according regions. Okay, so food balance is an indirect method to estimate the amounts of food consumed by a country's population at a certain time. So if you can see this example here, is between 1963 to 2013. Okay, so they track the consumption of, example, at the below here, fat supply and protein supply between that time frame. Okay, so food balance sheet provides data on food disappearance or food availability rather than actual food consumption. So this is not actually what we consume, but based on the import and export data of the food producers in the country. So if the intake per capita per day is high, they assume that the intake of the individuals or Malaysian population will also be high. Okay, so here in the food supply graphs, we can see that the supplies kept on increasing. In 1963, it's only around 2,400 calories, and in 2011 or 2013, at the end point, it's now 2,900 maybe. Okay, so there is an increase in the food supply in Malaysia. So based on that, we can calculate the calorie per capita per day of Malaysian population. But you won't get similar data when you assess the actual dietary intake of the population. If you see the Malaysian Adult Nutrition Survey, the mean intake does not reach up to 2004 or 2009 calorie per day. Okay, so the second graph at the below shows the fat supply quantity and protein supply quantity in Malaysia. So they have grouped certain foods to be in the fat group, and certain foods into the protein group. So fat will be mostly palm oil intake in Malaysia. So we can also see that both fat supply quantity and protein supply quantity kept on increasing in line with the calorie intake. So it started at 50 gram per capita per day, and now it is around 80 to 90 gram capita per day in 2013. So what are the strengths and limitation of food balance sheet? So the strength is it gives a total view of countries' food supplies. So we don't have to measure individually. So we just look at the data and see the trend of intake of the population. The second strength is this method indicates food habits and dietary trends. So I've just explained just now that the trend from this we can see is increasing. The third strength is used to plan international nutrition policies and food programs. So this is more for international nutrition thingy. So they can compare between countries, between regions, and so on. So we must also acknowledge that this is the only data available on countries' food intake practices. So as a whole, as a country, this is the only data available to see the trends of intake between a period of time. So if you only depend on Malaysian Adult Nutrition Survey, Malaysian Adult Nutrition Survey first was conducted in 2012 and 2013, if I'm not mistaken. And the second Malaysian Adult Nutrition Survey was conducted in 2014. So we only have 2 data points. Instead, if you look at the food balance sheet, we have for every year from, this is just an example from 1963. They might have data from earlier years than this. So, but there is a limitation of food balance sheet. The first one is the accuracy of data may be questionable. Like I've said just now, I'm not sure if Malaysian is consuming 2,800, 2,900 calories per day as a mean. There are people consuming a high calorie diet, but not as a mean of the population. And this only represent food available for consumption because this is based on import and export. How about foods that being planted at their home, at their own kebun, back door? So that is not counted here. Okay, things that don't go into the market is not counted here, and it does not represent food actually consumed. Okay, and does not indicate how food was distributed. We only know for the country this is the total amount, but we do not know whether rural people are consuming more compared to urban, whether males are consuming more compared to female, things like that we don't get from food balance sheet. And finally, does not account for wasted food. So we know that most of the foods in the distribution line got wasted in between because it's expired, or there's a damage on the food, or maybe it doesn't qualify to be in the market. So food balance sheet does not account for wasted food. Okay. So the second method, this is food account, and we usually use this to measure household dietary intake. So when we say food account, so we have some sort of a form that we will record the buying practice and the usage of foods from the store or pantry. Okay, so we measure the dietary intake within the household institution where congregate feeding is practiced. So where usually we feed congregatively, example is at a nursing home, at a hospital, at the hostels, okay, so at the prison, okay. So places like that, we can use a food account method to see how the food is being consumed by the people within the institution. So it account for all foods on hand in the home in the beginning of the survey period and all that remains by the end of the survey. So normally institution might do a bulk buying at the beginning of the month, maybe. So all their racks will be full with food stocks. Okay, and when we start to measure the intake, we record all the grams of foods in their stock, in their pantry. And at the end of the month, we go back and measure again the balance of food available in their pantry or in their stock. So by that, we know how many have been consumed. But this takes into consideration that, or assumes that, no major changes in household inventories during the survey period. So if we are doing the survey for a month, so we assume that in between there is no additional foods being added into the pantry, or if it is added, it must be recorded. So what are the strengths and limitation of this method? The strength is, first, is suitable for use with large sample sizes. So in a large institution, this might be a good method. Can be used over a relatively longer period, and it gives data on dietary pattern and habits of families and also other groups in the institution. It is less likely to lead to alteration in diet, because if the food is missing from the pantry, it won't go anywhere else except into the stomach of the residents. So we assume that. Okay. So and it's very economical to do this kind of study, because we don't have to measure each individual. We just measure at the pantry or at the store. But there is some limitation. It does not account for food losses. So some food might get spilled, some food might got expired maybe, or thrown away in between. Okay. So there is also, it is also based on respondents' literacy and cooperation. If the institution gives the permission to conduct the study there, and the person managing the pantry or store should be recording all the movement of food from the pantry to the kitchen. Okay, and the final limitation is it's not appropriate for measuring individual food consumption. Okay, obviously, it's because we are only measuring household level. Okay, 24-hour diet record. So those who have been practicing as a nutritionist or dietitian might have used this method a lot in our daily services. So 24-hour diet record is when the subjects, parents, or caretaker were asked by the trained interviewer, sometimes a nutritionist or dietitian, to recall the food intake during the previous 24 hours or preceding day. So that's the reason why it's called 24-hour record. So we just meet them once, and then we ask them what they have consumed in the past 24 hours by asking them to recall what they have actually consumed. Okay, so 24-hour diet record detailed description of all foods and beverages consumed, cooking or preparation method, brand names, quantities usually estimated in household measure, vitamin and supplement use. So a lot of information are being recorded in 24-hour record. So the interviewer helps the respondents remember the foods by using food models and tools as a memory aid. So we usually bring our sendok, pinggan, cawan, okay, and also we might bring some sort of models, food models, to show whether or to gauge the respondents on the serving size. So we also ask the respondents' activity day and night, and inquiring how they might be associated with eating, drinking, and snacking. So this is especially when the respondents can't recall. even a normal person, if you suddenly ask them to recall what they have consumed in the past 24 hours, it might be difficult. For us, it's easy. For people who doesn't uh, remember what they consume, they might have gone to a hotel buffet the previous day, so they might not remember exactly what they have consumed and the quantities they have consumed. So we ask them the activity of the respondents, what did they do, or with whom that they consume the foods, at what time, whether they are watching television, and so on. This is just to help the respondents to recall their food intake. So after the interview, we check for omissions or mistakes and analyze using computerized method. So this is what I said previously. So it's not finished after the interview. After the interview, we checked for omission with the participant. And also mistakes when we do recording and conversion to weight of the food after the interview ends, and we must analyze with using computerized methods, softwares, and so on. So this is an example of how a 24-hour diet recall form looks like. So this is just an example. So you will have different types of form, but normally the form doesn't deviate much from this format. So you have first you have the name of the respondents, the date of the recall, and the day of the recall. So we cannot just record the name without asking the day and date, because intake of food is different between weekends and weekdays, and maybe it's a weekend at some other places, but it's a weekday in another place. Like example, in East Coast, it's a weekend on Friday, but in Kuala Lumpur and Selangor and states equivalent to that, it's a weekday. So we must know the exact date and also day. And the form will consist of the meal time. We must record the meal time, the food item and description, the household measurement that being described by the participant. And we also have an additional column for weight. This is for us to use to convert the household measurement into weight before entering into the software. So if they say they consumed 1 cup of rice, so we go back and convert that 1 cup into how many grams of rice. So the strength of this method is it requires less than 20 minutes to administer, because we only ask a single 24-hour recall. So it's also inexpensive because we only need a form, maybe some household tools and food models to help the respondents. It's easy to administer, especially if you are trained to administer them. It provides detailed information on types of food consumed, so which we cannot get from other type of method. So we can ask how the food was prepared, what are the brands of food products being used. Okay, so it is also have lower burden to the respondents, because respondents need to only just answer questions to the interviewer. They don't have to do any recording themselves. We can also use probability sampling when we conduct 24-hour diet recall, and we can use to estimate nutrient intakes of a group of participants. So if we want to increase the accuracy of estimation, we can use multiple recalls. Because if we just measure one day 24-hour diet recall, it won't be that accurate, because our diet varies day by day. So we usually use 3 days diet recall, 7 days that recall, okay, 14 days that recall, to increase the estimation of nutrient intake assessment of individuals. And this method is more objective than dietary history and food frequency questionnaire method, and does not alter the usual diet of the participant, because they are not aware when we are going to interview them, okay? And it's very useful in clinical settings. But there is some limitation, because one recall is seldom representative of person usual intake. This I've explained just now. There are also underreporting and overreporting problems in 24-hour diet recall, mostly underreporting because they can't remember or they omitted certain foods, okay? So it relies a lot on the memory of the participant, and they tend to omit dressings, sauces, beverages, and this leads to underestimation of energy intake. So that's the reason why the interviewer must be well trained to gauge or to probe questions so that the participant can recall it well. But some of the food eaten is not reported because they are shy to report the food, maybe. So this is considered missing food. Although how good you probe them, if they do not want to report, it's going to be missing in your 24-hour diet record. So there are also foods not eaten but reported. So this we call as phantom foods. Maybe the dietitians will have a lot of experience in this.